Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Biden signs off on an extension for the Paycheck Protection Program and prepares to reveal more details about his new infrastructure package. But the price tag is controversial on Capitol Hill. Dozens of unaccompanied minors test positive for the CCP virus at the southern border, while hundreds who crossed into the U.S. are now sheltered in Southern California. 2 new gun bills are moving to the Senate. Congressman Scott Perry says those laws should focus on criminals and not law-abiding gun owners. How can the West combat the threat from Communist China's digital spying? Experts discuss what threats China poses and how the Biden administration should act in response. And the WHO publishes its study on the origins of the virus. But some countries are voicing concerns, citing a lack of critical data. If you're a small business owner still recovering from pandemic blows, now you'll have 2 more months to apply for a small business loan. President Biden this afternoon signed off on an extension for the Paycheck Protection Program. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more details from D.C.
The Paycheck Protection Program was supposed to end this month, but with the newly approved extension, businesses have until May 31st to apply for a loan. The administration will be processing applications until the end of June, so it's possible that businesses could be waiting until that June 30th deadline to find out if they're approved.
Nearly 90,000 businesses are still in line, and there's money left. Without somebody signing this bill today, there are hundreds of thousands of people who could lose their jobs and small and family businesses that might close forever.
It passed smoothly in Congress with only 7 senators opposing the extension. And while Congress, for the most part, agrees on this spending bill, lawmakers are still starkly divided over Biden's proposed infrastructure package.
To deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind in the United States by 2030.
A first step they're proposing is to make use of shallow waters between Long Island and the New Jersey coast,
so that this economy remains competitive and so that we increase productivity.
The bill is estimated to cost around $3 trillion. And while the Biden administration says it will rake in $12 billion in capital investments, Republicans are raising an alarm bell that a massive tax hike to pay for it could hurt the economy.
To raise the corporate tax from 21 to 28, to raise the capital gains tax, doubling it. You can't tax your way into prosperity, and you can't tax the American people. They'll just shut down.
And some moderate Democrats also expressing that their states have struggled with higher taxes.
Higher taxes are stifling economic growth for our region and decreasing property values, which are already falling. Our taxes are too high. They should be cut, not raised. Younger workers and businesses are moving out. And
Representative Scott Peters of California says he's more comfortable with a smaller hike, suggesting a 25% corporate tax is better than Biden's proposed 28%. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin suggests that he won't support the 28% tax either. And aside from these moderate Democrats that could pose a challenge to passing this infrastructure bill that could cause tax hikes, the Senate filibuster could block it too. But reports are coming out that Senate Leader Chuck Schumer is looking to sidestep the filibuster and use budget reconciliation for a second time. We reached out to his office to find out if he plans to move forward with this, but haven't heard back just yet. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
And Biden is expected to give more specific details about this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package tomorrow as he makes a stop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And those long-awaited and once-delayed results on the origin of the CCP virus are out. The WHO says it's likely that animals were the source of the CCP virus. NTD's Miguel Moreno has those results and the international response.
Where did the Chinese Communist Party virus come from? The World Health Organization's investigative team says the lab origin theory is extremely unlikely. And in their now published results, they say the zoonotic transmission theory is likely to highly likely. So in sum, they say the virus most likely transferred from an animal to a human, causing the deadly and devastating economy-crushing pandemic we're in today. WHO's Peter Mbarick led the mission.
apart from that idea that there is a lab nearby or several labs nearby in the same city, so there must be a link. Apart from that, nobody has been able to pick up any firm arguments or proof or evidence.
China gave him and the rest of his team permission to enter the country a year after the outbreak began. Mbarek and the WHO appear to trust whatever China allowed them to see during their visit, but the U.S. says China withheld important data. The Department of Justice, alongside Australia, the UK, and several other countries, say they're concerned about the study. Here's a line from their joint statement. We support a transparent and independent analysis and evaluation free from interference and undue influence of the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the statement wasn't a demand or a request. The WHO director says the study doesn't mark an end to the investigation, just an important start.
Today, the Biden administration released its first annual country reports on human rights practices. Secretary of State Antony Blinken highlighted several states in his remarks, including China and Burma.
Secretary Blinken released the 2020 country reports on human rights practices at the State Department Tuesday afternoon. This is the department's 45th such annual report to Congress.
The trend lines on human rights continue to move in the wrong direction.
This year's report details the Chinese Communist regime's extensive human rights abuses. It says the regime committed genocide and crimes against humanity in the last year against Uyghurs and other minority groups in Xinjiang. Activists and some organizations continue to accuse the regime of forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, including Falun Gong practitioners and Muslim detainees in Xinjiang. The report also listed significant human rights issues in Hong Kong. In his remarks, Blinken highlighted that recently Burma's military have beaten, imprisoned, and killed nonviolent protesters. He talked about how to use a broad range of tools to stop abuses and hold perpetrators to account.
One way to do that is by working with the United States Congress, which has passed laws providing new authorities to sanction human rights violators, things like the Global Magnitsky Act, the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, other pieces of important legislation.
Blinken says it's much more effective when the United States speaks out and works with other like-minded countries to protect human rights, such as its recent work with Canada, the European Union, and the United Kingdom on individuals engaged in atrocities in China's Xinjiang.
We hear from experts on how the new Biden administration can address national security threats. Those threats stem from Communist China's digital espionage. NTD's Kevin Hogan brings us more on the FCC commissioner's take on Huawei as it relates to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
There's nothing that a communist likes less than hearing the truth spoken freely.
The commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, says the U.S. needs to continue the State Department's successful effort to promote clean networks across the world. He says the U.S. needs to keep engaging with other countries to counter the Chinese regime's efforts to promote Huawei through its Belt and Road Initiative.
In Africa, myself, I've been, a couple hour drive down a bumpy road outside of any major town. You get these small little communities, and there's, Huawei banners all over the place. And so they're playing a very long game with respect to this Belt and Road Initiative in Huawei ZTE.
Dean Chung is a senior research fellow at the conservative-leaning Heritage Foundation. He said Chinese internet providers, hardware manufacturers, and software designers can all be made to comply with Chinese law. He says in the Chinese system, there's no civil society and nothing is beyond the CCP's reach. So whether it's a private company or a state-owned enterprise, the CCP still has access to them. And they may even have Communist Party committees that oversee every aspect of operations, he says. This, combined with the Chinese term ABC for artificial intelligence, big data, and cloud computing, allows the CCP to manage a huge amount of data in order to maintain surveillance over its population, Chung says.
And this includes the typical espionage aspects of trying to find out other people's military secrets. Your war plans, your fighter aircraft designs, your transportation plans. But in addition to that is monitoring what the Chinese would consider anti-China elements.
He says these anti-China elements may be the Tibetan government, organizations that advocate religious freedom, or just simply groups that oppose the CCP. He notes that, to China, these are all targets that the CCP must penetrate. Nuri Turkel is the commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. He's a Uyghur himself. He brought up the fact that the CCP sanctioned Chairwoman Gail Manchin and Vice Chair Tony Perkins over the weekend in retaliation for U.S. sanctions on entities involved in genocide against Uyghurs in Xinjiang.
This is a sign of desperation in Chinese attempt to try to change the narrative, try to turn this into whataboutism, trying to call the United States or objective professionals who have training and knowledge on this as liars. So when you have nothing to say, when you are cornered, this is what they do, what you do.
Whataboutism traces back to Cold War propaganda, where the Soviet Union, instead of addressing concerns about uncomfortable questions about what it's doing, would point at unfavorable events in the U.S. and other parts of the Western world to deflect responsibility. Turkel says when the Chinese regime calls people standing up to its abuses liars, it's a global concern, and he says now this is a bipartisan issue. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
At the San Diego shelter, dozens of the over 700 unaccompanied minors who crossed the U.S.-Mexico border have tested positive for the CCP virus. Here's more from NTD's David Lamb.
The San Diego Convention Center can hold nearly 1,500 minors, and it's currently sheltering migrants. Bonnie Preston from the Health and Human Services told NBC7 that at least 69 minors tested positive, all asymptomatic. Preston says there are now over 700 girls sheltering at the center. Around 250 more expect to arrive every other day until capacity is reached. San Diego's mayor says the center is only taking in girls aged 13 to 17 and provides food and services.
We're a welcoming city. We're going to show the very best of this country.
Critics say the Biden administration is causing the border crisis. They say this is because Biden reversed effective policies set by Trump, and that the U.S.'s shifted stance is mixed messaging. Currently, migrants seeking asylum can stay in the U.S., and Representative Juan Vargas says it's legal.
They then have these rights, and the rights to be able to see if they qualify as an asylee to be able to stay in the United States.
The girls arrived in the U.S. as part of the massive influx at the border.
But can you imagine the trauma that some of these girls have faced on the way here? Can you imagine how difficult it's been for them?
A county supervisor confirmed to News 8 that among the positive cases of the CCP virus, none of the kids required hospitalization. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
According to the former Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, more illegal immigrants have been apprehended this month than during the peak month of the 2019 border crisis. NTD's Grace Coulter has an update on the border.
More illegal immigrants have been apprehended this month than during the peak month of the 2019 border crisis. This is according to former Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan, who has received the provisional CBP numbers from internal sources. Morgan said Border Patrol has apprehended more than 150,000 illegal border crosses during the month of March. A further 30,000 evaded capture. Compare that to 2019. May saw the highest number with 144,000 apprehensions. And contrary to what the Biden administration has been saying, according to a senior Border Patrol official, the vast majority of families illegally crossing the border are being released into the U.S. During a press call last week, the official broke down the numbers. Upwards of 85% of family units apprehended by Border Patrol are being released. On March 25th, 6,000 people were apprehended at the border. Of the 2,200 individuals within family units, 1,900 were released. The rest were processed under Title 22 to be expelled. Over the weekend, Texas Representative Henry Cuellar told CBS News that thousands of illegal immigrants are being released into the U.S. without court notices for their immigration proceedings. Here he is.
Some will be returned, but over 2,000 of them have been released into the United States without a notice to appear. I emphasize, without a notice to appear at an immigration court. They're supposed to appear, show up maybe in 60 days, report to a ICE office.
Without a notice to appear, the chances of the migrants ever showing up for a court proceeding become much narrower. And now over to unaccompanied minors. Another temporary shelter for unaccompanied children has just opened in San Antonio, Texas. This one in the Freeman Expo Center. On Monday night, over 500 migrant boys aged 13 to 17 were transferred there. This is the 6th emergency shelter opened to temporarily house the overwhelming number of migrant children. It's expected to house over 2,400 minors. Volunteers from Catholic Charities worked all weekend to set up the facility and prepare clothing and hygiene products for the minors. All of the children were tested for the virus before arrival and will be tested every 3 days. Now zooming in. A 12-year-old unaccompanied migrant child from Guatemala gives an emotional account as he gets off a boat raft and turns himself into Border Patrol. The young boy named Oscar told Spanish language network Univision that the smugglers only fed the children once a day on the journey to the border, and that many children would faint from the heat while they were cramped in the back of a trailer.
Había calor y empezaron a desmayar todos. ¿Te dieron de comer, mijo, en el camino? ¿Les daban? Nos daban, pero una vez al día.
His story reminds us of the dangers unaccompanied children face as coyotes and traffickers bring them across South America to the border. Other accounts have detailed that if the children become too weak to continue the journey, the coyotes leave them in the desert to die. And new photos give us a better look into the migrants' journey. Abandoned clothes, children's shoes, baby bottles, deflated life rafts, and wristbands. Hundreds of discarded wristbands, like the ones you get at a theme park. The cartels and human traffickers give these to migrants to keep track of them. Each wristband, a migrant's name written on the back. That's all for today's update. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks, Grace. And violent crimes are on the rise across American cities, and new gun bills are heading to the Senate. Congressman Scott Perry tells NTD what he thinks is behind the rise in violence. NTD's Allison Lee has the details.
Republican Congressman Scott Perry tells NTD that Americans are buying more guns recently because there's a spike in crime in urban centers. He believes gun bills should address criminals and not target law-abiding gun owners.
Criminals, by their definition, do not abide by laws. And so another law that requires a criminal to, or anybody to fill out paperwork or what have you, if a criminal is willing to get a gun illegally and use it, they're certainly not going to be concerned about, filling out some paperwork.
Perry criticizes the two gun bills the House passed recently, saying they do not address the recent shootings. Instead, he wants lawmakers to look at the root cause of the rise in violence.
The breakdown of the family in the United States of America. That leads people oftentimes to places they wouldn't normally go, puts them in situations where they might feel compelled to complete criminal acts for whatever reason.
Perry adds that because certain crimes are not prosecuted and certain laws are not fully enforced, they encourage more criminal acts. He also wants people to look more closely at what actually kills more people and not just disarm law-abiding citizens.
Rifles are less responsible for killings in America than knives, and even to a certain extent less responsible than other weapons, which I think the FBI can characterize as hands and feet.
Perry believes gun laws should focus on mental health issues in addition to criminals, but he doesn't trust bureaucrats to determine people's state of mental health.
There are people literally in our society and policymakers that would contend that simply wishing to own a firearm in itself might be considered a mental health issue. And so we have to be very careful about who is determining what the parameters are for mental health.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said last week the Senate will vote on expanded background checks soon. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said on Monday that bills should prevent people with mental issues from having guns, and he's willing to engage with Democrats to discuss background checks. Allison Lee, NTD News.
Today marks the anniversary of an assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. NTD's Sapphire Quarter takes us back to that historic day.
40 years ago today, John Hinckley Jr. attempted to kill President Ronald Reagan. He fired 6 bullets, hitting White House Press Secretary James Brady in the head, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, and a police officer. The final bullet ricocheted off of the president's car, hitting Reagan in the chest.
If it hadn't been for the speedy work of the surgeons and his own personal physique, Ronald Reagan would have died that day.
All of the victims survived the shooting. However, Brady was permanently disabled. His death over 6 years ago was determined to have been caused by the gunshot. Despite the assassination attempt, Hinckley never served time in prison. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Hinckley had been obsessively watching the movie Taxi Driver. He began stalking Jodie Foster, a star in the movie, who rejected his advances.
And so Hinckley got the idea from watching this movie over and over and over of assassinating Reagan to try to impress Jodie Foster. And of course, it didn't work.
Hinckley was released from St. Elizabeth Hospital in 2016. The assassination attempt occurred only 70 days into Reagan's presidency.
Reagan was brand new. He was untested. It was his challenge, and it was something he responded to quite well. And the American people carried a level of affection for him they hadn't had before.
The people's love for Reagan must have continued as he served 2 full terms. Sapphire Quarter, NTD News.
And you can watch the full interview with Craig Shirley on last Saturday's episode of The Nation Speaks here on NTD. And coming up, Washington, D.C.'s public health emergency order has been extended until May 20th. Though D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser loosened some of the district's restrictions. And more people visited the Great Smoky Mountains during January 2021 than any other January on record. Find out why and more ahead on NTD News. Washington, D.C.'s public health emergency order is now extended. They will stay in Phase 2 of reopening. The order was set to expire on March 31st.
D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser announced that the district's public health emergency order has been extended until May 20th. Mayor Bowser loosened some virus restrictions last Monday. For outdoor gatherings, up to 50 people are now allowed. Indoor fitness classes can resume with up to 10 people. Movie theaters can open up to 25 people, but telework is still encouraged. The district also suspended rush hour parking restrictions, expired residential parking permits, and expired meters. But they did resume some parking enforcement around school zones in mid-March.
I live in another part of the city where there's a lot of traffic and parking by daytime folks. So it can be problematic for those who live and are looking for parking places in front of their homes or their apartments. But I still think overall it's a smart thing to do.
DC's possible revenue from parking tickets fell by half in 2020. AAA researchers said from 2017 to 2019, DC issued $1 billion in traffic and parking tickets.
Where does the revenue generated by that generally go, and what is being offset by doing so? Are there priorities that are not being addressed because of the revenue that's not coming in?
Deputy Mayor Lucinda Babers told NTD the Bowser administration is currently reviewing when parking enforcement will resume, along with other DC government agency functions. Meanwhile, DC museums are starting to reopen. The National Building Museum will open on April 9th after closing 16 months ago. DC's newest museum, Planet World, will reopen on April 1st. The International Spy Museum and National Museum of Women in the Arts are already open, but none of the Smithsonian museums are open yet.
More people are getting vaccinated in New York City and across the state. Now, Governor Cuomo says even more will be able to get the doses. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
New York City's mayor says the city is on track of reaching its goal of vaccinating 5 million people by June. So far, 4 million jabs have been given out. Now, up until last week, only people over the age of 50 were able to get a shot. That number has been lowered already, and by next week, basically everyone will be able to get a vaccine if they want it. On Monday, Governor Cuomo announced that everyone over 30 is eligible for a vaccine. And starting next week, the age will be almost cut in half. Everyone over 16 years old will be able to sign up. On Tuesday, the city's mayor praised the fire department. Some people are too old and vulnerable to go out and get a shot of the vaccine. The firefighters visit those people in their homes to give them the jab.
You show up and you literally save the day. Sometimes we talk about heroes, sometimes we overuse the word, but this is heroic. What you're doing is heroic.
The age of eligible people is not the only thing that changed in New York. According to the New York Times, a judge in the Bronx Supreme Court ruled that all people behind bars should receive vaccines as well. Before, only prisoners over the age of 65 were able to get a shot. That's around 3% of people behind bars in New York State. Now, after the new ruling, everyone in a state prison or jail will be able to get a vaccine. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
New Yorkers flock to Central Park to enjoy a hobby low on cost and high on relaxation. That's right, bird watching. And all you need is a pair of binoculars. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
It's a beautiful day in Central Park, especially for longtime birdwatcher and naturalist Gabriel Willa. New York City is entering its second pandemic spring, but now there's an end in sight.
Last spring, things were still really scary, there were so many unknowns about transmission and was it surfaces, was it airborne, and just a lot of things.
Enthusiasts call the hobby birding. David Barrett, another avid birdwatcher, points out that expensive gear isn't required.
Birding doesn't require a lot of fancy equipment. You don't have to spend a lot to go birding, but one thing you really should have, binoculars. And you don't have to buy expensive ones.
Barrett runs the Manhattan Bird Alert on Twitter. He recommends getting a smartphone adapter for your binoculars that allows you to take pictures of the birds. Friends Danny Katz and Jody Prusen started coming to Central Park to enjoy the benefits of birdwatching, like spending time in nature.
But it's really been a source of sublime joy, I have to honestly say.
Mary Jane Boland, a longtime birder, often talks to those just getting started with the hobby. She says she tries to gauge their long-term interest in it.
I've really talked to a lot of newcomers because I'd like them, once they can do anything, to still want to watch birds and protect birds.
For now, the birds in New York's Central Park have a captive audience. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
The Great Smoky Mountains saw a record number of visitors this January. We find out why people are finding the national park so alluring.
Ever since the pandemic began, Americans have been wanting to escape from its all-encompassing gloom. With cities on lockdown, millions of vacationers are finding solace here in the Great Smoky Mountains. The national park had the second highest number of visitors ever in 2020. That's in spite of national park visits being down nearly a quarter from the year before. Over 500,000 people visited the park in January. That's nearly 100,000 more than last January. One teacher visiting the park says that he notices his students being more depressed and having more symptoms of ADHD now that so much of their lives have turned virtual.
And like doing something like this where you go down into the earth, or yesterday we were on top of a mountain and drinking from the electrical charged water of this waterfall, like those kinds of things make you feel better.
The elk are most active at dusk and dawn. The park has more variety of wildflowers than any other North American national park. The tens of thousands of acres make social distancing easier. The enthralling icicles of stone are a testament to nature's patience. They took thousands of years to make, drip by drip. But it's not only the Great Smoky Mountains that have been drawing a string of visitors. One man came from Chicago to experience the beautiful Burgess Falls.
And it just feels great to be out, see the lush greenery, the birds are singing, the sun's shining. It's been wonderful.
Based on recent trends, the Smoky Mountains may have a historic number of visitors in 2021.
Coming up, at least a quarter of France's public debt is owned by Chinese investors. We hear from one expert on how this could benefit the Chinese regime. And China's Consul General in Brazil lashes out at Canada, calling the country a running dog for the U.S. The remarks came soon after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau criticized China's latest sanctions for attacking Canadian democracy. That and more on NTD News.
"90% of news outlets in the United States are controlled by 6 corporations. They're not out to tell you the truth of what's happening. They're out to tell you the picture of the world that they represent. The mission of the Epoch Times is to chase the truth, to ground all statements in facts, and prevent people from being misled. This is a battle between truth and deceit. Subscribe today and join the Americans who are seeking truth and tradition. We'd love to have you on board."
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
In France, a report says at least 25% of public debt is owned by Chinese investors, a figure that might cause concern for strategic interests in the future. NTD's David Vives has the story.
After castles, vineyards, and airports, Chinese investors seem to have found something else to purchase in France: public debt. According to a report published by an economic think tank, China owns at least 25% of France's public debt. For economist Philippe Erlin, this is in line with the CCP strategy to conquer Europe.
We know for sure that China is buying what it can in European countries. They bought machinery companies in Germany, wines in France. It is like a market. They take what is best in each country.
In September 2020, the French Minister of Economy and Finance said China's central bank was among the first to own France's debt. It says the pandemic, which triggered a 300% hike of France's public debt, could increase the scale of this issue. It also says the more debt China owns, the easier it will be for the CCP to influence France's politics and attitude toward China. The Minister of the Economy said in a report published this month on public debt, "We have seen countries become dependent on their creditors." And there's also another problem, according to Erlin. Forced closures of many businesses and enterprises have resulted in many of those going bankrupt, and they too are being purchased by China.
Some Chinese companies seem to have benefited from the economic crisis. In the US, we saw big tech companies benefit from the closures of small businesses. This is the same for China, which also increased its presence in Western countries. They are now able to purchase at very low cost any assets in France or in other countries, which they do.
NTD reached out to the think tank about who exactly owns the public debt. The director said she asked the same question to the Ministry of Economy, but hasn't received an answer. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
A Chinese diplomat ramps up Beijing's aggression toward the West, this time name-calling Canada and its prime minister. The comments were made via a Twitter post on Monday. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
The Communist Party, or CCP's Wolf Warrior diplomacy style, hits a new aggressive high. China's Consul General in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, claims Canada is a running dog for the U.S., or someone who blindly follows orders given by someone else. At the same time, the Chinese official labeled Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a spendthrift, meaning someone who irresponsibly spends lavish amounts of money. The remarks were posted on Twitter on Monday. Chinese Consul General Li Yang posted the caption along with a picture of Trudeau. Addressing the Prime Minister, he wrote, "Boy, your greatest achievement is to have ruined the friendly relations between China and Canada and have turned Canada into a running dog of the U.S. Spendthrift." A number of users questioned the comments. One person wrote, "Imagine how Chinese diplomats have fallen to such a level." Yang replied, calling them a West-admiring dog, but he seems to have misinterpreted the acronym for laugh out loud in the original comment. Addressing the user, Yang continued to say, "You cannot even reach the level of LOL, and your life is for nothing. Such a pity." Yang posted the accusation shortly after Trudeau commented on China's sanctions on Canada. He said China's penalties attack the values at the heart of Canadian democracy. The social media attack appears to fall in line with a recent order from Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. Voice of America reports that 2 Chinese diplomats confirmed the information. In the order, Xi commanded all Chinese diplomats to show what he called fighting spirit when facing challenges, like in dealing with U.S.-China relations. What's behind Beijing's wolf warrior like diplomats' rising aggressiveness? Many people draw a parallel between the Chinese regime's current wolf warrior diplomacy and the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 70s. The revolution gave rise to a group of far-left Maoist youth known as the Red Guards. The generation of Red Guards are now in their 60s, and many are now occupying positions of power in China. Many people see parallels between CCP leader Xi Jinping's call for a spirit of struggle and the violence and the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. Soon after the Cultural Revolution began in 1966, the CCP's Central Cultural Revolution leading team ordered regime officials to send Mao's books to Chinese embassies abroad. Mao's writings focused extensively on struggles against the capitalist West. In August 1967, a mob of over 10,000 Red Guards rushed into and burned down the UK's diplomatic office in Beijing. It was the most serious diplomatic incident during the revolution. The British charge d'affaires survived the attack. He wrote to his wife afterwards, saying, "I walked out and found around 5,000 people in the yard. Anyone in reach of me began to beat me with whatever was in their hands. Women pounced at me like crazy, trying to knock me down with sticks. They dragged my hair and strangled me with my tie. My head was severely bleeding and I almost lost consciousness." CCP mouthpiece People's Daily described the event as a meeting to denounce the crimes of the British Empire against China. A French diplomat working at the French embassy in Beijing told Radio France International about his experience. He said while he was traveling in China during the Cultural Revolution, a group of 13 to 15-year-old Red Guards forced him and his wife to say "Long live Chairman Mao." When he explained he couldn't say it because he was a diplomat, those Red Guards stared at him with vicious eyes. Many people believe today's Chinese diplomats have taken on the Communist Party's spirit of struggle, and many suspect the Red Guards of the 1960s have grown up to be the diplomats of today.
The Amazon union vote is ready to be counted after workers wrapped up voting yesterday. And Ohio billboards are popping up across the U.S., trying to lure businesses away from states like New York and California. That and much more coming up on NTD News. New York is floating new taxes right now, too, and that's giving other states a chance to sell themselves as a low-cost alternative. Ohio is putting up signs in the Big Apple to attract businesses away from the city. So how's it working out? NTD's Phil Zoe has the story.
Your buildings are taller, our taxes are smaller. That's what it says on a large print billboard in Midtown New York. Economic development nonprofit Jobs Ohio has put up signs across the U.S. touting the state's low taxes.
Lower property taxes, lower business income taxes, and things like avoiding the death tax really do add up as to why Ohio is a much more competitive environment than.
Ohio currently doesn't have a corporate income tax rate. That's compared to 6.5% in New York and nearly 9% in California. Ohio also doesn't have an estate or death tax.
So as business owners look to retire and pass along their assets from their businesses to their families and their loved ones, government's not going to come in and get another take.
Ohio has improved its rank to number 29 for economic outlook in the Rich States, Poor States report. But Williams says Ohio isn't stopping there.
Ohio does want to become even a top 10 state. And so it's not just the current policy, it's the expectation of the future business environment that attracts businesses.
Jobs Ohio says the billboards are working because they're getting calls and emails from people who are interested. The billboard campaign started last fall, and the nonprofit says they hope to continue attracting businesses to the Buckeye State. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
The Amazon union vote is ready for tallying. A warehouse in Alabama just finished voting yesterday for what would be the first Amazon union. The results could have broad implications for labor nationwide. NTD's Colin Frederickson reports.
People united will never be defeated.
We might soon see Amazon's first union. Warehouse workers in Bessemer, Alabama, finished voting on whether to unionize on Monday.
People deserve a livable wage. It is unions that fight for that.
The U.S. National Labor Relations Board is now reviewing the ballots. In a written statement, Amazon points out that the group representing the workers, RWDSU, has fallen 25%, and that Amazon provides starting wages of $15 or more, health care from day one, and a safe and inclusive workplace. Experts say it won't be easy for a union to form.
This is a really tough gig, organizing warehouse workers. They turn over a tremendous amount. A union is about the solidarity between workers, right? It's about workers acting together.
Documents show that Amazon could be firing around 10% of its staff annually. Empty spots are quickly filled because Amazon pays reasonably well, requires little training, there's health care, and people can start work quickly. Also, there's no way to form one big Amazon union.
The way that labor organizing is legally constrained in the U.S., it's going to take a very long time because each warehouse has to be unionized separately.
If Bessemer successfully forms a union, some experts say this could be a groundbreaking watershed moment for labor. Others say it probably won't be a big deal.
Amazon can be difficult about actually negotiating. It can appeal on the grounds that some of its claims about the union were not properly treated. And a year from now, it can call for a new election to reject the union.
It's unclear when the results of the vote will come out. Colin Frederickson, NTD News.
The U.S. warns it will impose tariffs of up to 25% on imports from the UK. It's in retaliation to a new British tax on tech firms. NTD's Patrick Hayden brings us more.
The US has warned it will impose tariffs on UK goods if the UK goes ahead and rolls out a digital service tax. US tariffs would cover ceramics, coats, industrial robots and refrigerators, and are expected to raise about $325 million. The UK has proposed a 2% levy on tech companies' revenues, not profits, that are derived in the UK. It's for companies that earn more than $680 million per year and at least $34 million from UK users. Amazon, Google and Apple say they will pass the cost on to their customers. A UK government spokesperson said it wants tech firms to pay their fair share of tax. France is also set to face a similar retaliation as it rolls out its tech tax. Both the UK and France say their tax is a temporary measure until a wider international corporate agreement is in place. The US tariffs will be subject to a review over the next few weeks. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Coming up, the UK government is considering using digital face scanning to enter pubs and other venues. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's still not sure about the idea. And a new report says the backlog of cases in the UK court system has now reached crisis levels. Find out more in just a moment on NTD News. Brits might have to scan their faces before entering pubs. The idea comes as the UK government is debating over vaccine passports. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
The UK government is considering using facial recognition technology to enter pubs and other venues. But UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson recently said it's too early to decide whether vaccine certificates will be used for pub entry.
There are complexities, moral complexities, ethical problems that need to be addressed, and we'll be saying more about it.
UK vaccine passports will use facial recognition to see if someone has either been vaccinated, recently been tested, or has developed immunity to the CCP virus. He does admit, though, that there are ethical problems that need to be addressed.
The libertarian in me is also trying to protect people's fundamental right to life and their ability to live their lives normally, and the only way really to restore that for everybody is for us to beat the disease.
The Times reports that two tech companies, iProve and Mvine, have received more than $100,000 in grants from the government. And the facial recognition software has already been rolled out to the National Health Service app, which is separate from the government's contact tracing app. Users can access their health records, including test results and vaccinations, with it. iProve CEO Andrew Budd says that without some technical assistance to help pubs screen pub goers, it just won't happen. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
A report out today highlights the crisis in the UK legal system. It says pandemic has added more pressure on the criminal courts. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the story.
An inquiry by the House of Lords Constitution Committee looks at the impact of the pandemic on the courts and tribunals in England and Wales, which the report says were already in a vulnerable state. The report says the backlog of cases in the Crown Court has now reached crisis levels. These courts handle serious criminal cases such as murder, rape and robbery, and normally have a jury. Pandemic restrictions disrupted these courts' normal operations. The report's key findings suggest it may take several years before the backlog of criminal, family and employment cases returns to pre-pandemic levels. At the start of the pandemic in March 2020, Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services, or HMCTS, received an additional £150 million in government funding. This was partly to pay for additional temporary courtrooms, referred to as Nightingale courtrooms, that allowed for more socially distanced trials to take place. HMCTS announced on March the 2nd this year that a total of 50 such temporary courtrooms have opened, with the recruitment of 1,600 extra staff. Funding was also used for a new cloud video platform to enable remote hearings to take place, but its use has started to decline since its introduction. Police withdrew their support for video remand hearings on the platform in December 2020 due to cost and service pressures. The report states, "The pandemic has shown that remote court access has the potential to enhance access to justice, but there is a significant difference in the experiences of professional and lay court users." It recommends to continue investment in and develop the technology for remote hearings. Before the pandemic, there was a backlog of 39,000 Crown Court cases. Since then, another 17,000 have been added, and justice has been delayed still further. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Kingston, Surrey.
After the easing of lockdown measures in the UK and with the unseasonably warm weather, fitness enthusiasts headed outside today into the sunshine. NTD's Earl Rhodes met one group gathered in West London's Turnham Green during their boxercise class.
On Turnham Green, in the shadow of its Grade 2 listed church, people run their dogs, go for a walk, cycle, play with their children and enjoy the mini heatwave. Since Monday, lockdown easing means people can now meet in groups of up to 6 for outdoor exercising.
It's just wonderful to be outside and exercise and meet a few friends, because so far it was just 2 people at a time, well, one me plus another one. So yeah, it was. We wanted to chat more than exercise because we were so excited to meet again. Yeah.
And actually, we've been so lucky because the weather is gorgeous, so we have enjoyed our first day out in such a nice weather doing exercise with friends.
The class instructor said the good weather was a bonus, but people were keen to get outside and back to exercising anyway.
Well, I think now that restrictions have been lifted, I think people will be going out a bit more and going a bit crazy because they've been kept inside for so long.
The step towards normal life has certainly lifted spirits here in West London.
And definitely now with the spring, it's spring outside, but it's spring also in the soul. And I really enjoy this day, and it's perfect that this first day is with the sun.
This beautiful weather is expected to go on until Sunday, though it will cool. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
And soon we'll see a bathhouse that was discovered underneath a tapas bar in Seville. The excavation reveals a piece of Spain's Moorish culture and past. And the Louvre is one of the most iconic buildings in the world, and it has a hidden collection of works. Prospective visitors can view them online. Stay tuned to find out more. And the discovery of a historic Arab bathhouse underneath a tapas bar in central Seville is revealing details of the city's Moorish past. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
In the shadow of Seville's most visited site, the Giralda, sits a tapas bar. The Giralda is the bell tower of the city's cathedral, built in the 12th century when the Moors ruled Spain. The bar owners took the pandemic as an opportunity to renovate. There had been rumors that it was a site of a hammam, or Moorish bath, but the size and detail uncovered has surprised everyone. The floor has been removed, and the main baths uncovered, complete with skylights and Moorish decorative paintings.
There are other Arab baths bigger than this one, but they don't have as many paintings as this one. All the walls are decorated. Elsewhere, only the ceilings are decorated. But here, all the ceilings and all the walls have paintings.
Emilio González Ferrin is a professor of Islamic studies at the University of Seville. According to Ferrin, the excavation of the building allows people to experience the old city.
The importance of the discovery of the hammam is primarily physical. It is almost at street level, so you can see the traditional features of the Andalusian city. It even has pathways in the downtown district, where the current city may be.
According to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Almohad Empire that emerged from Africa established the city as its base. It managed to reunify Arab Iberia, turning the city of Seville into the epicenter of Andalusian culture. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
The Louvre Museum in Paris is using its pandemic-driven closure to its advantage. It's working to reorganize a secret collection of masterpieces that rarely go on general display. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Paris's Louvre Museum normally welcomes 10 million visitors a year. Although its halls are closed for now, the Mona Lisa still smiles over the galleries, and great masterpieces hang from the walls. But there's a much less well-known treasure trove of works here, if you know where to look. Xavier Salmon is the director of the museum's graphic arts department. It's a library which stores drawings, pastels, and miniature works, preserved so they last for years to come.
It's extremely sad that due to the pandemic, we are no longer able to welcome our usual visitors. But the lucky thing is that the whole collection is online.
Since the 17th century, the Louvre has accumulated a collection of 250,000 graphic arts that date from the 9th century to the mid-1800s. But they're not on permanent display. The department rotates just a few samples of the work every 4 months. Before the pandemic, the graphic arts department would welcome about 800 people each year by appointment. Salman says there are ways visitors can get ready for when this library is able to reopen.
Those who want to prepare for their visit have time to go on our database, look at the drawings with the photos and the information, and then once they're preparing their trip to Paris, they can eventually come here and see the drawings.
In the meantime, he's used the closure to reorganize and redistribute the works in an overhaul not possible before the museum's closure. For now, it is unclear when the Louvre will reopen its doors.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.